Christopher, thank you so much for joining us, and welcome. Welcome to the stage.
Hey. Thanks for having me. And yeah, get to kick this thing off, be the first one to go. So we'll have a good time.
Yes.
Well, thanks for the intro. Yeah, thanks for the intro, Maisa. Thanks everybody who's here. Couple things before we get into it, just so you know, from a presentation standpoint, if you haven't seen me present before, you'll know I'm extremely informal and really like to engage with all of you. So one thing that's going to be a little bit nuanced about this is down at the bottom, there's the group chat. If you want to pull that up, I actually will be watching the group chat and interacting with the group chat along the way. So rather than do the traditional presentation, all slides, and then at the end do a Q&A, we'll still do some Q&A at the end to wrap things up, but I want to give you the opportunity to kind of engage. And I have some questions, not just poll questions, that I'm actually going to be asking you to kind of jump in on. So if somebody can just type into the group chat just to make sure you're alive and breathing, that'd be great, so I know you're there. But then with that, yeah, I'll get started here while you folks are all doing that. So yeah, we're talking about a lot of buzzwords. I'll say that. Perfect. Thanks, Delia. We're evolving talent, upskilling, resilience. There's all sorts of good stuff happening right now. Perfect. Here comes all the hellos. I'm not going to do much about my background because, quite frankly, if you want to know more about who I am, you can Google it. There's plenty of information online about that. But I think the big thing to note on this is that when it comes to my take on the world and things like that I think will just help shape the next 40 minutes or so, is that I've always been at the center of people development, business operations, and technology. And then that's given me a little bit of a unique bend on the way I look at things and the way I talk about things. So, feel free to ask clarifying questions throughout. Feel free to get additional perspective, because I want to make sure that I make this as applicable to you as possible versus me just sharing what I think. As Maisa said, one of the things that I'm really passionate about is where technology is taking us and what it's allowing us to do. And I also recognize that that can be a little uncomfortable and a little bit terrifying for a lot of people, which is actually why I started learning Tech Talks, because there's a ton of stuff out there. There's a ton of new words and buzz trends, and there's all this stuff, and it can be very overwhelming to know where to start. So that's a little bit about me, who I am, where I'm coming from. Before we go into it, one of the things that I think is important to just level set right now, and why are we talking about being future ready, upskilling? Why are we talking about resiliency? There's a lot of stuff that's been going on. I know over the past few months, there have been a lot of things that have kind of jumped to the surface, but a lot of that stuff has been building like a tsunami for a while. There's no doubt that COVID-19 hit like a nuclear warhead and blew up a lot of the things that we're doing. But the reality is a lot of this stuff that we need to tackle right now, whether it's reskilling, whether it's dealing with automation, whether it's the most recent events, trying to tackle diversity and some of these people issues that are raw and uncomfortable and tough to work through. There's no shortage of stuff on our plate, and there's no shortage of territory that is difficult to go through right now. And I think that's where right now some of the things, and the point that I really want to drill into is, this is why now more than ever, it's critical that we can do this stuff at speed and scale and focus on critical skills. And that's why resiliency is such a big part of this one. So resilience is a term I'm hearing a lot right now, and this is, get ready for group chat, because this is where we're going to start firing this one up. That said, resiliency means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. And I know in a lot of the stuff I've been talking about recently, building resilience in our workforce is an important skill. It's a skill I think every workforce should be, or every company should be focused on. But I am curious, when you hear resilience, right, when you're hearing this stuff, what does that mean? So if you maybe have an initiative around focusing on resilience, developing resilience in your workforce, how are you defining that, or have you defined that? So I'll wait a sec, because I know there's a little bit of a delay to get a chance to see some of the feedback in the group chat. But I know this is something that, while I'm waiting for some responses, I've had to work with my teams, with the people I interact with, and some of the things I'm doing outside of GE, is to actually be able to say, well, we're going to talk about resilience. We know we need to build it, but in order to do that, we need to know what we actually mean by that. And so, Nina, I see your thing, they're talking about being able to cope and bounce back. Bounce back is a big term that's kind of coming up in the workforce. There's a lot of stuff that's blowing up right now. I know one of our other bounce back ability, Jay, and I love it. I think maybe we'll tag that as a new term there. The quote that for me really lays this out well, I think, is that resilience it's different than being numb. I think sometimes this is where we can go south with this from a human standpoint, is as we look to build resilience, we can almost take this in a cold way, right? That resilience can mean we just need to make people tough. We need to make them willing to just kind of get over it or move on with things. And I personally don't see resilience as that. I don't see it as us working as an organization to make our employees more cold or willing to just kind of put up with what's going on. It's really the fact that I see Kirk said, right? It's the growth mindset. It's the versus fixed. It's that ability to say, what's going on. You're aware of what's going on. You're empathetically acknowledging that this is bad, or this is tough, or this is hard, or this is a struggle for us, but we're not going to let it win, right? We're not going to let it win. And I think that attitude is at the core of what we're talking about, what we mean when we say we need to build organizations that are resilient. Because if we go into this thinking we're going to build a resilient organization, which means we're just going to kind of deal with whatever happens as though it didn't happen, I think that's actually more destructive to where we want to go with our organizations than where we should. So with that, though, I think the thing about it that sometimes can be counterintuitive, going back to that, it's not this just brazen willingness to plow through things, is the fact that in order to build resilience, you need to change this mindset around failure. And I think this is one of the things that I want to talk about with this when we look at how we build resilient organizations, because I think it's an opportunity area in learning and development. I know it's been an opportunity in the teams I've led over the years. We have this tendency to try to build so everyone can succeed. And I actually was doing a live stream earlier today where we were talking about finding this healthy level of failure and being willing to change the way we think about things and say we shouldn't be building an organization that accepts failure, but we need to be building organizations that expect it, right? And to do that, we need to do it in a healthy way. We need to do it in a safe way. We need to do it in a personalized way where we recognize that everybody's gauge and acceptance or ability to handle failure is different, and we can't just treat everybody the same. And I think this is some of the challenges and why when we get to this, how do we do this from a future ready standpoint, technology is going to play a key role in it. And so I'll talk a little bit about that, but I think this whole kind of movement around normalizing failure in our organizations is something that we in L&D can play a leading role in. I believe, and I've had some success in doing that. That said, when we talk about being future ready, we talk about a lot of these things. We talk about how we need to be future ready. We need to upskill the organization. We need to think about all these things. I don't know that we always do the best job, and I'll take this hit myself personally, that I haven't always done this, and I have to constantly remind myself of this, that we can't get there if we don't define the destination that we're going to. And that sounds simple, I think, and it gets thrown around a lot. We say things like we need to be more outcome focused. We need to be more focused on, business outcomes, things like we say it, but what does that actually look like? And so when I've done this in the past, and as I continue to do this, when I look at how we define our destination, I really break it into three categories, and it's worked very well. So there's a lot of talk about human centricity, and I think that's more critical now than ever, this empathetic focus on humans and their differences and their uniqueness. And I think that's critical, that when we say, all right, we want to be a future ready organization, or we want to upskill in these key areas, we need to think about that less as this corporate-y L&D type thing and more of this, what does that look like for the people who are the audience of that, right? Where are they today? Where are they now? Why are they there right now? I look at some of these things, and as I've deconstructed these here and in other organizations, when we really dig into this, there's a lot that goes behind the curtain of individuals. And when we don't acknowledge that and we say, we're just going to reach this destination because this is the destination, and not account for the fact, well, we aren't there because of the people, and how are we actually going to bring those people along? It's not a play that goes very well. So there's the whole human side of it, the people side. The other area that I think we have opportunity to grow in is focusing on the actual behaviors behind these things, right? So if we want people to move from point A to point B, we need to be very specific and really take the time to dive into what are the actual behaviors that drive us to that. Because it's so easy to generalize or to, just kind of make blanket corporate-y kind of statements about what that is and not really dive into what does that look like? Like, as an example, when I was recently doing leading a project on improving our ability to have salespeople interact with customers during this difficult time, we could say we need to improve communication skills, right? That's kind of the blanket statement, but we really had to deconstruct that and say, well, where is that breaking down? Like, what are the actual behaviors that we want to see? And let's make it in simple terms. So as an example, one was like asking open-ended questions. That is a behavioral trait that we need to focus on, right? And things like that. And so as we're looking at these destinations, we really need to break down what are the actual behaviors we want to see in the people that we want to do this. The other one that is, and this one I will admit for me is sometimes hard, is thinking about the words we use and being careful about the words we use. Words and storytelling. I've done a lot of talking about storytelling recently and the importance of storytelling and the power that telling a compelling story can have. This is something that as you're mapping this out, be intentional about the story that you're telling about that destination you want to achieve. So I think those are the three things that, as I've led things and as I've pushed things forward, I've been very intentional about thinking about that. Now, that's great, right? At a high level, you want to look at this 100,000 foot strategic view. Then there's this whole diving down into this. Okay, that's fine from a high level. Let's say we've identified that. We know where we want to go. Where do we focus? And this is a topic of debate that I will tell you right now, if you're looking for a perspective on what are the top 10 skills or what are the 5 skills every organization should say, I would say it doesn't exist, at least from my standpoint. I don't think it exists out there. I think there are some strategic short and long-term bets that we can make. I think we can look at, if you look at some of the human skills versus hard skills, I personally really see human skills as rising to the top right now, especially as automation and technology is tackling a lot of these hard skills for us. What makes us uniquely human and our ability to do that well seems to be rising to the top significantly. Now, that's not to say, oh, well, these are the top 5 human skills, or we need to ignore hard skills. I think it is a bit of an art and science act as we look at this. But the big thing I would add to this, where we focus, and this is where I've done a lot of work recently around how we transform this human skills side, is many of these human skills that are coming to light are not new. They're not new. They're not necessarily different. The application of those human skills is different. And this is where we as L&D leaders can take the time to actually break this down, going back to this, right? What's going on with the people? What are the behaviors we're trying to drive? Communication has probably been on everybody's skill list since the dawn of time, in terms of we need to improve the way we communicate as an organization. However, over the last few years, what communication looks like has changed dramatically. And so that leans to us to say, okay, well, if this is a priority, right, how are we actually going to deconstruct that? And again, going back to the behaviors piece, how are we actually going to look at communication differently and then prioritize that and create solutions that drive us there? So I am curious, though, because there is this whole back and forth on human skills versus hard skills, and maybe some of the case studies or things I can reference will be, based on you. I'm curious, for those of you out there that are focused on skill development, which it's an L&D conference, it should be all of us, what are some of the ones that are bubbling to the top for you right now? And maybe that can be a short and long term in terms of, I'm sure COVID has had a dramatic impact on some of the fire drills. But even before that, what are some of the big ones that you've had on your priority list, or ones that maybe weren't on your priority list that are now surfacing? And I'll share with you as I'm watching to see some of the stuff come through the group chat. One that has communication comes to the top of mind for me. And the reason it does is that communication as a result of COVID has been a huge area of focus, given the fact that the way we communicate is changing dramatically. And I think COVID really brought this to light with a lot of things. And so we've really had to look at, okay, if we're saying we need to improve our communication skills, what does that mean? You know, is it the way we talk? Is it the way we interact with one another? Is it the actual technology and the things we do, things like that? So there's a lot of that, which I'm seeing a lot of things around communication. Change management is probably a big one. Adaptive, resilience. I mean, I think a lot of these things are so, and that's interesting. A lot of times I do see a lot of people talking about the soft skills, and not a lot of times people do bring up the hard skills. And so Annette and Jennifer, I see the technical and hard skills focused on that. I think it's important that with those, and this is one of the ones I've actually had a few conversations on recently, is that we don't lose sight of the hard skills, but that we pay close attention to what hard skills are we investing in and how are we doing it. So as a simple example, right, you want to look at coding languages. It can be very easy to kind of jump on this is the next coding language, which may not necessarily be a bad choice, but you have to think about what is the longevity of this coding skill, because perhaps this language will be either fully automated or, you know, obsolete in a certain amount of time. And so how much do we actually invest in that? So I think going back to that hard skills versus soft skills, it's less about, well, which do we pick, and thinking strategically about how do we pick them? How do we balance our investments, you know, across that portfolio so that we're actually addressing all of those things. You know, Bob, you mentioned presence. I think that's a big one, especially, right? You talk, and that ties into the communication piece. You talk about that right now. People are having to adapt to a new way of being present as a result of COVID and this whole digital workspace, right? People are having to create presence and connect and collaborate and do things with people in ways they have never done that before. And so I think what's great about seeing the dynamic answers I'm seeing in the chat is that there's not a right answer, right? Going back to what I said, there isn't this is the skill everybody should be developing. It's about us truly understanding the pulse of our business and saying, okay, right, where are we going to make those investments? Now, the one thing I will say, though, that is easy to overlook is the actual what's going on right now. We cannot overlook the fact that there is a ton of stuff going on with our employees right now, just from a mental capacity standpoint, from an emotional capacity standpoint. And it just got worse, right, in the last week, right? So much more has been piled on top of what was already a relatively fragile emotional state in our workforce. And so, you know, I've been in a number of conversations recently where there can be this natural tendency to push and say, hey, people are home, people have flexibility, people have time, let's push for more development. And not that we shouldn't continue to drive our organizations forward and do everything we can. But at the same time, we can't be tone deaf to the fact that people are carrying a lot of burdens right now. And this goes back to this art and science behind things of we need to be empathetic. We need to be sympathetic to what people are dealing with and recognize that learning and emotions all happen in the brain. And so to think that when people are completely tapped out mentally due to emotional stress, all the things on the slide here, to layer more on top of that can actually cause more damage than good. And so I think this is where we need to be so careful as we go into this that we don't in an attempt to continue to prove the value that we bring to our organizations, we ignore the very people we're here to serve, and we just kind of steamroll over them. So I add that piece because this is something that I think we need to be very mindful of right now. I think we're in a bit of a moonshot right now as L&D organizations and talent development, whatever term you want to call us, in that we are uniquely positioned right now to play a role in our organizations that I don't know that we've had this opportunity before, and we have an opportunity to land on the moon and change things for the better and have a dramatic impact on things. If we're not careful, we have the opportunity to completely miss the shot and go flying into the sun. And so I don't say that to intimidate or to scare people, right? We're dealing with a lot ourselves. Our own identities are being challenged right now in terms of what does it mean to be an L&D. But it does mean we need to take the time to be intentional and very careful about the plays we make and the steps we take forward to be able to do it well. So with that, I want to talk through just a couple practical things that I think it's great to hear these conversations and say, wow, that was really good. But so what do we do about it? So where do we go from here? So what I will say is it's so easy, and I've been guilty of this in the past, to point fingers at organizations, say, well, we can't change because our business leaders don't understand, or this function doesn't get it, or our managers aren't taking responsibility for things. But the reality is we have to stop the excuses, and it starts with us. And that's in completely shifting our mindset in the way we move things forward. And so I think as we think about this, yes, are there things outside of our control? Absolutely. And we have to work within the challenges that happen. Will be the first to tell you there are more times than I can count where I knew we needed to move this way and there just was no way to do it. And I think right now what we have to do with that is flip our mindset to say, well, instead of just kind of giving in and saying, okay, this is the world we live in, to say, well, where can we play, right? How can we operate in a different way? And I will tell you, I used to have hair at one point. This is hard. This is hard work. The work we have to do is hard. It's going to take time, but it starts with us. And so the first thing I would advocate is we really need to take the leading role in saying we're going to change our attitude. We're going to change our mindsets. We're going to be a model example of what we want the rest of the organization to be. The other thing, Patricia, I'll answer that question in a second here. The other thing that I would say with this is too often it's easy in L&D to work from the Crystal Palace, right? We can work from the Crystal Palace and not really pragmatically understand the work that is happening in the organizations. And so this means actually getting out there and getting to know the work. And I think sometimes we can go too far. We can come up with reasons why we can't, right? I can't be everywhere all at once. Sometimes this is just about talking to people, right? Sitting down and having authentic conversations with people on what are they actually doing, right? What are they doing? What are they struggling with? Why are they struggling with it? Things like that, and genuinely caring. And it can be difficult, right? I get it. It can be tough to do this, but this is a critical step to doing it. And it can be small and it can be manageable. And I think the other thing is we have to understand the way learning actually happens, right? We have to almost kind of hit reset on ourselves and say, okay, let's think about the way we actually learn, which is we don't just learn the same way, right? The peanut butter spread approach, it doesn't work for us, yet so often we try and apply it that way. We learn through, I learn through doing things. I don't learn through just pure content consumption, yet so often, right, that's how we do things. We push content. So I think there's an opportunity for us to spend some time getting to know the people in our organization, the challenges they're facing, the things that they're going through. And I know I push my teams very hard and take this personally to spend time getting to know what's going on and having those authentic conversations, and then thinking very practically about the way learning is happening in the organizations. There's a misconception that, learning happens in our tools and it happens through the things we create. And that's not true, right? That's just not even accurate. And so I think sometimes accepting that and saying, I don't need to be the gatekeeper. I don't need to be the one that's going to take everything and make everything run through me, because the reality is that it doesn't work in real life. And so I think this is almost going back to that mindset, an opportunity for us to shift it, but also take some practical steps, set up some calls, talk to people, get out, actually get to know your audience a little bit more and hear where they are, and actually listen to that with open ears, right? Not just to hear what we want to hear with that. The other one that it was a big conversation I had today was we need to create these safe environments that encourage failure. And failure is a very difficult word, I think, sometimes for people to come to terms with. We're trained our entire lives to, avoid failure. We want to avoid it. We want to stay away from it. We want to succeed. Failure doesn't make us feel very good. It doesn't make our learners feel very good either. And so flipping the switch on this is not something that happens overnight, but it's something that we can take intentional steps to do. And to give you an example of something like this that I've been working on recently with our groups was as we were looking at, I'll go back to the sales skills component, and we were looking at how do we actually create environments where people can get better at communicating. And the first way we did that was we said we need to create conversations that don't happen well. These cannot be scenarios that we design that my 9-year-old could figure out what the right way to navigate the path is, because that doesn't actually push people to do well. Now, the safety part is you want to look at the zone of proximal development. This is where we have to think about this and recognizing that, hey, we can't just design failure as a one-size-fits-all, right? And I think this is where, because we've struggled with this in the past, we've kind of tended to index towards, well, let's just make it so that nobody really fails because we don't want to push them too far. And I think, as you'll see with the next slide and the topic that I could talk about probably for the rest of the afternoon, there are now opportunities for us to create personalized failure for people in our organizations to be able to be pushed to a point of not succeeding and actually learn from that, right? And have us be there to coach them through that. But to do that, we have to create those environments. And going back to the point of it starts with us, if we're not trying things, if we're not pushing ourselves to fail, shame on us for expecting, the rest of our organization to do that. And so I think this is another one of those opportunities where we can say, hey, this is something we can take to home, right? Let's create some safe environments in our own organizations where we can fail. Let's run some tests. Let's run some experiments, knowing and expecting they're going to fail, so that we can start to normalize that for the organizations we work in. The last, or not the last one, but another important piece that I will say, it's why I started learning Tech Talks, is we have to embrace technology. This is not a, well, maybe at some point down the road, it's part of our roadmap. We have a digital strategy. I mean, this needs to be our lifeblood moving forward, and not because it's a trend, not because technology is cool and what everybody is thinking, but it actually allows us to do the things we need to do to be effective in a way that were never before possible. And I think, the conversation I had earlier today, we were talking about this. Sometimes we deviate from technology because it's foreign territory for us. I will be the first to say I know a lot of people in L&D who they didn't get into L&D because they were into tech. They got into L&D because they love being around people. They love facilitating. And this whole tech movement is starting to challenge our identity a little bit, which can cause a bit of an identity crisis. But the reality is we can adapt our skills and what we do in this new world of technology to still put the skills that we love and have come to figure out, and we can apply them in a completely different way. But what technology actually allows us to do is do so many of the things we've wanted to do, that we'd like to do, that we haven't been able to. So just as an example, the conversation I was having a little bit ago was about artificial intelligence, right? We can look at artificial intelligence and we can say that's threatening to us. That's threatening, it's dehumanizing, it's taking us away from the human connection. When in fact, when you embrace technology and you look at a technology like adaptive learning, that can actually assess a person's mental state, right, where they are from a knowledge standpoint, and dynamically adapt content to them, that is far more effective. It's what we've always dreamed of being able to do, but it now is possible. And so I think this is where we need to really dig into technology, not for the sake of technology, but to understand it, know what's possible, and then have this keen laser focus on when does it make sense to pull this in. So one point of clarification I will make with this embrace technology, while I'm a big advocate of technology, I will also be the first to say, never pursue technology for the sake of technology. It will always leave you wanting. You won't solve problems if you go out thinking, if we buy the right LXP or if we buy the right adaptive learning platform, it's going to solve our problems. It really has to be understanding what this technology can do, how we can apply it to our organizations and the work that we do, and then actually doing it. But for us to do that, we have to completely embrace it. It can't be a second option for us. And so this is where I encourage people, get to know the tech, learn about it. Even if you're not a tech person, you don't need to be. You don't need to become a coder, but go out there and learn what this stuff can do. Have conversations with people who know more than you, and ask them questions. It'll be a comfortable way for you to move into this. The other piece that I think is extremely important, I said this before, is we need to get so much better at telling really compelling stories, right? I can tell you from the massive transformations I've led over the years, the ones that have gone well versus the ones that have gone poorly. Honestly, I could look at the tech implementations. I could say, well, we had tech failures here and there. I will say at the core of what's made them successful is the stories that we told along with them, right? The stories that brought that change to life and all that good stuff. And so I think this is an opportunity area for us as we go back to, crafting our stories, crafting what problems are we trying to solve? How are we doing that? What is the purpose behind that? How are we actually carrying that forward and being able to tell that in a dynamic and compelling way? I can tell you right now, as you're going through these transformation journeys, if you were going to double down on, what's something we could really focus on as an organization to move forward, even as the digital guy, I would say being masterful storytellers may actually bubble up to the surface, just given the fact that you can have the best strategy in play, you can have the best tech in place, you can have the best team in place, but if you're a terrible storyteller, you're never going to carry it forward. And so I think this has been a huge lesson learned for me over the years, is to be able to do that and get better at helping my teams, help myself through actually dynamically adapting the stories we tell and what we're trying to achieve to be able to bring people along. And then the last one, and then I'll open it up for some Q&A, and there's a couple questions that I want to answer in here as well, is with any of this stuff, right, when it comes to upskilling, when it comes to big tech implementation, whether it comes to building resilience, none of this stuff is easy. I said it earlier. This is not easy work. And if you got into L&D for because you wanted a pretty slick cake gig, it's not the place to be. I don't think it really ever was the place to be, but more than ever, with everything going on and the expectations being placed on us and the needs that our organizations have, this is a rough bout, but it's high risk, high reward. And I would just say, continue to build your own resilience, build your own persistence. I can tell you, I've been kicked in the teeth, kicked in the stomach, told no more times than I can count. And I think if I look back and said, so what was it that's got you where you were, or what's made you be successful and where the things have gone well, the storytelling has played a big role. Some of it is, don't quit. It's easy to quit. I guess the caveat I would add to the hang in there for the long haul, and normally I have this as kind of the second half to this statement, is we also have to know when to pivot, right? So hang in there for the long haul. You're gonna be in for a long road ahead. There's a lot of work that has to be done. The risk with that, and I will be the first one where I have missed the boat before, where I didn't see we were driving off a cliff, is sometimes we can get so invested in the time and energy that we've put into things, we don't realize when times have shifted, when things have changed, and we need to abandon our strategy, or we need to abandon something that we hold near and dear to our heart because we've become personally attached to it. So I say this with, again, kind of the art and science behind it. Build that strength, build that resistance, build that resilience and that persistence. While at the same time, I would almost say, find the people around you. I think somebody said something before about having more conversations. We need to have more of those, and we need to bring in our team, our advisory board, to help us do that. And I have a team of people that I connect with outside the organization that helps keep me grounded, that helps keep me from getting too personally attached or too focused on something, because it happens to everybody. And so I would say that's kind of the final piece that I would add there. Hopefully that's just my take on these things. Sitting in my chair here, from the things I've done, those are some tips and things that I've found that have been very helpful for me over the years. So to the one question, then I'll open it up for Q&A. So feel free in the group chat to ask any questions. I'll kind of go off the cuff here with any questions that come through. Patricia, to your question about corporate GE, that's an interesting discussion. I would say it's been a continual evolution in terms of how we work together, right? There is a continuation as we figure out as an organization, how does the business function work? How does the actual sub-business? GE is a big company, right? We've got all the different, aviation and healthcare and power, and then you got corporate. We're in a journey right now. I don't know that we have, the answers to this. I know we've had our bumps in the road. I won't say that we haven't at times gone head to head with each other over certain different things. I think there is a universal partnership that we're trying to all do the right thing. So yeah, I don't necessarily have an answer that, yes, they've been receptive as we've worked through things. I think we continue to work through what that looks like and how we continue to play that out. As many of you who may be watching in big organizations know, right? It's a journey. It's definitely not a sprint. So we've got a couple minutes left for those of you here, and thanks for the book recommendation, Nina. I will definitely check out the Book of Beautiful Questions. Anybody else? What else with the couple minutes left before Delia or before Maisa jumps back in? Are there any other questions that I can answer for folks who are tuning in, perspective, anything like that? I'll give it a second here. I know there's a bit of a delay. While I'm waiting to see if there's any questions, with a couple minutes left, I'm actually going to jump back to this one. One recommendation I would have on the embracing technology piece, as you're working this out, I think sometimes it's easy to lead. Good question, Patricia. I'll answer that one. As you're doing this technology piece, one thing I would recommend, and this is kind of the way that I run it with things, is we do this based on capability, not platform, okay? And we also ask the question, what would we do if we could do anything? Not how can we improve what we're doing today? And that's not to say we do everything that we want, but that's kind of the mindset we come into this stuff. And so I would encourage people to create kind of a capability map based on your organization to say, hey, if we could do anything, what would be the things we would want to do? And what capabilities do we need? Because what that'll allow you to do is it'll actually allow you to then look over what your current tech stack is and figure out, okay, where are the gaps? Where are we covered? What are these different things that we can do? And again, do it with this. Don't do it in an iterative fashion, like, well, how could we make our virtual classroom more engaging? No, think like, okay, if we were to engage people, how would we engage them? What would be all the different things we would do? So I'll pause there and then I'll answer this other question. Patricia, how much of the actual workforce will be working from home from now on? I actually think a lot more than the projections and the conversations I'm having right now. Is a lot of companies I'm talking to, they're already projecting 30 to 40% of the workforce will just not come back. So there's a pretty large percentage of people that were historically in the office that I think will no longer be in the office. So that again goes to the point of, why do we need to make this change? Well, because even if you were in an organization where maybe people were all in person and you had the opportunity to work with people like that, that's not going to be the case. Now, the thing I would say to that, though, is that I have seen over the years that there's a perception that people are together when really distributed workforces aren't new. I think we've just historically excluded them. And so I think this is an opportunity for us to say, how do we bring everybody together? How do we reach everybody where they are, instead of how do we work in the environment we're most comfortable with? So, question about learning technologies I'm implementing in a post-COVID world. A lot. Couple things I'll just hit on real quick because we've only got a couple minutes. Couple things that I'm looking, and so the one thing I will tell you, my world and the strategies that I've been designing haven't really changed much as a result of COVID, because everything that I was building was digital first. Not to say we didn't ever do anything in person, but everything had a digital first footprint, so we could flip the switch on and off if we ever needed to, or we could actually augment anybody who wasn't in person anyway. So my tech strategy hasn't necessarily changed too much as a result of COVID, but what I can tell you, some of the things that I'm very focused on from a tech standpoint is, one, adaptive technology is a big thing. To me, that is one of the biggest game changers in the space right now, is how adaptive technology is changing the way people consume content, and how we can actually know what people know and what we don't know, and how we can root out confidently held misinformation. So adaptive technology is on my short list. I personally am doing a lot with digital experience. So how are we actually creating simulation work and giving people opportunities to practice and fail in a secure environment? So that's another one, and I could elaborate on that for quite a while. And then the other one is, I'm doing a lot with artificial intelligence and machine learning and NLP, natural language processing, to look at how do we actually use voice, right? How do we use voice to analyze, assess, right? Get more information from people and give them feedback, help them better understand the way they're collaborating. How do we use it for performance support? So instead of people having to type, they can talk, things like that. So to me, natural language processing and what we can do and how we can hook that up is another technology that I wouldn't say is post-COVID for me, but those are kind of my top three, I guess, if I were looking at it right now. So with that, I know we're right at time. So Maisa, I will throw it back to you. Thanks everybody for the thoughts and the chat and all that good stuff. And thanks for having me.
Christopher, thank you so much for a fascinating opening session to L&D Champions Online. And thank you everyone for being so engaged. Got some really, really great questions. And if we haven't got to those, I'm sure Christopher will be happy to connect with you on LinkedIn and answer anything else that you may want to chat about. And with that, we draw day one to a close.